Hello RC pilots, this is Ron, and I have a programmable mix that I have set up that I wanted to share with you today. This programmable mix is aimed at people that are about to do a maiden flight, and it's just a little bit of insurance that will help you out should one of these situations occur. The first situation is where you've got a plane that is tail heavy or has some kind of thrust or alignment issues that's requiring more down elevator than you're going to find available on your transmitter. That creates a situation where you're constantly having to hold down stick on your transmitter, trying to keep the plane under control and trying to get it around the pattern and back into a situation where you can get it safely onto the ground. That is not something that you will actually experience very often. Most of the time, probably 90 to 95% of the time, maiden flights are going to be very manageable. Yes, you'll have one that may be out of trim pretty good bit as far as your roll is concerned. May have one that's out of trim very much as far as your pitch is concerned. But it's just a matter of dialing it in, using the trim on your transmitter, keeping it under control, adjusting the engine, whatever the situation is, to try and manage the aircraft until you can get everything trimmed out. 90 to 95% of the time, your maiden flights are going to be in that scenario. It's going to be successful if you do all the proper setup, make sure your engine is running the way that it is, checking the security of servos and control surfaces and of your control rods and all the types of things that we know we have to do and have to have correct in order for that plane to fly properly. But the situation I'm talking about is where that plane is tail heavy for one reason or another. This will give you a way of dialing in some additional down trim which will drastically aid you in keeping that plane under control. Also, the second scenario that I'm talking about is where you've got a plane that has flaps and it requires elevator offset when the flaps are deployed. This varies from one different model to another, just about all of your warbirds, and that's primarily what I fly. Most of your warbirds, P-40s, P-51s, P-38, B-25, Corsair, just about every one of them need down trim when the flaps are deployed, or else they balloon up drastically. You slow down to about half throttle before you put in your flaps, but you still need that down elevator. And you never really know exactly how much down elevator is going to be needed. So this will allow you to put in the amount of down elevator that it takes when the flaps are deployed with a separate switch. And then when you get down, it makes it very simple for you to make the proper adjustments in your transmitter to where you can have that automatically come in when you deploy your flap switch. So anyway, I have all of the steps right here on this screen that you've been looking at, and I will tell you this, that this written information will be available to you. It will be found in the information box for the video, and you'll have a download link to where you can click on that download link, go to this particular page that you're looking at, and you'll be able to download it as a JPG file, or you'll be able to print it out, keep a copy of it, whatever you want to do. So with that, we're going to take a look at exactly what we're going to do to get this programmable mix operating. And even if these two scenarios are something that you do not feel like you actually want to set up or need to set up on the type plane that you're flying, this will give you a little bit of information about how to set up the programmable mixes as far as the Futaba 14SG is concerned. So with that, we'll get into the actual details of how to do it. We're now ready to take a look at how we're going to set up this programmable mix in the 14SG. This is a tremendous radio. It has a lot of capability. Most of the planes that I fly, in fact all of them that I fly now, are scale type aircraft, and the majority of them are warbirds. You've got a Corsair, P-51, P-47, B-25, on and on. The whole thing is, each of those planes, they vary in price from between about $3,000 to $4,000. So when you're looking at an investment like that, not to mention the fact of the amount of work and time that goes into getting one ready to fly, you want to take every precaution you possibly can to make sure everything is the way it should be when that plane takes off the ground for the first time. This programmable mix is very handy if you ever find yourself in a situation to where you cannot get enough down trim on the elevator to take care of whatever's going on with that aircraft, whether it's a tail heavy situation, a thrust alignment issue, or whether it's something that's going on in the surfaces. At any rate, when you're talking about that kind of investment, utilize your radio to the fullest degree that you possibly can. So with that, at this point, you should have the radio set up with the flying surfaces going in the right direction, specifically here the elevator going in the correct direction as you move the stick. So we're going to take a look at it right now. First thing we're going to do is go into the model menu. We're going to tap twice on the model, takes us into the model menu, scroll down to programmable mix. Hit the return button. Now you've got possibility of 5 different mixes that come up, and you can see that they're all inhibited, so I've not used any programmable mixes on this particular model. So we're going down to the very first one. Hit the return button to select it. You've got 2 pages in the programmable mix, and we're on page 1. First thing we want to do is hit the S1 button, and it'll take us to the second page. This is where we're going to actuate the mix. Just scroll down to the actuate. It's on inhibit. Tap the return button. Scroll to actuate. Hit the return button again. Now we're going over to the switch position. Accidentally hit the S1 and went to the other page. We're going over to the switch position. Hit the return. It takes us to the hardware select. And I like to use the right slider for this particular function. And I'll explain all that to you a little bit later, but the right slider is in a position to where it gives you very exact settings. You can, it's easily accessible, and yet it's in a position to where you won't accidentally be moving it or hitting it for some reason and causing some unwanted effect on your airplane. So we're going down the right slider. You select it, and then it takes you to the on-off switch. Now, when we get into the on-off switch, you'll notice here it's black at the top, white on the bottom. White is the on position. So the way it's presently set up, you would have the slider back towards you or in the up position would be turning it on, and you'd have nothing in the forward position. So what we want to do, just scroll right on down to set. You'll notice with my slider I can move it to whatever position I want to. I've got it down in the bottom position right now. Let's go up to the center position because that's where I choose to turn it on. Now, that is exactly the opposite of what I want. So, I scroll down one more to normal, hit reverse, Now I've got what I want. And what I'm doing is I'm setting it to where from the neutral position back towards the bottom of the transmitter or towards the up direction of your elevator stick, you're going to have no effect. Now you may have a situation where you want it all the way, and the only thing you have to do is just move that pointer on down here and then hit your return button, and you can get your get it on to where you've got movement in the up position or in the down position. But at this point, that's exactly what I'm wanting, is in the down position. So with that, I'm just going to hit my home exit button, go out of it. Now I've already got my switch selected, so we're going on down a little bit further on the menu. Now our master, what we want, scroll through it. This is actually setting up our mix. Hardware. Hardware lets us select the switch we want. And we've already selected the right side slider, so we'll just go back and do that again. So now your master is the right side slider. We've got our direction set to where it's doing exactly what we want. The slave is going to be our elevator. We just happen to be an elevator, but if you were wanting to do something similar to this, just scroll through it and select the one that you want. But elevator was default on this when we actually opened it up. So now we've got our details taken care of. So we're going over here and we're going to hit the S1 button again, and now we've gone back to the front page. At this point, we can move our switch, but even though the switch is moving, we don't have any throw set on our elevator. So what we want to do is scroll down, select here. Now notice as I start turning, what are we seeing? Right here on the graph, nothing has happened in the reverse direction. Everything is from the neutral point to the down elevator side. Nothing until it gets to neutral, and then at neutral you see it starts putting in the throw that you have selected. So we've got that taken care of, and that's all there is to do as far as setting this up. I think I mentioned it, yes, I know I mentioned it, but once again, you should have had your direction set up on your servo to where your servo was moving the correct direction for down elevator before we did this mix. So in just a couple minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what transpires. I've got a little mock unit set up here, and you'll be able to see the difference of what happens with this particular mix. Now this will allow you to see exactly how this affects your servo. I've set this up with nothing more than a 6-volt battery pack, simple on-off switch. You can see the receiver, and I've put a small gauge in behind the servo itself to where you can see the movement. So as I go over here with my transmitter, when I move up position, of course it's coming back towards the bottom. Down position, full down position, the way this is set up, it's giving us right around just a little bit over 40 degrees. So we're getting just a hair above 40 degrees. We can actually adjust that a little bit with our trim to where it's a little more accurate. But we're getting right at 40 degrees of movement on our elevator servo in the down position. Now that's going to vary, of course, according to your type model that you have. But if I take this one and move my right slider, you'll see that at this point I'm getting about another 12 degrees or so of movement just from the right slider. And all I am doing is moving that right slider from the neutral position to the full down position. And it's variable, so you've got it, of course, anywhere in there that you need. So if I go and I take my trim and I set it to the full down position, at that point I am out of trim. So that's about 15 degrees. And that's a pretty good bit of trim for most flights. However, there are cases, and I've had several cases that I have handled, about 3 cases I can think of, where someone was actually doing the maiden on their own plane and they ended up with a tail heavy situation or a model that was out of control because in one case a bad surface, but at any rate they were unable to control it and just literally handed me the transmitter. And I was able to get it down, but there's not, to me, one of the most awkward situations in the world is trying to hold a quarter stick or third stick of elevator down the whole time that you're flying, trying to make your turns and line up on the runway to get the plane down safely, because you've already got a tail heavy configuration and everything is extremely sensitive on it anyway. But in those cases I did manage to get it down. This will aid you tremendously in a situation like that. So now you'll notice that it has actually increased the amount of servo throw that I can get from that servo now. But the whole thing is, you don't have to go full down elevator, because you can trim it out with your right side slider to get yourself a comfortable position to where the plane is pretty well behaving itself, and it makes it much easier to get it back in. So my way of thinking is, if something this simple can help you in a very adverse situation, why not utilize that feature on your radio? Now you need to understand, you've just seen how that the actual servo throw, the overall total throw in the servo was increased when the switch, the right slider switch was moved. It increased the total amount of throw also. So I just wanted to mention that, because in most cases this is not a problem, but you do want to make sure that whatever amount of throw that you set up on that right slider switch is not going to cause your surface to bind or your servo to bind when it goes down to the full travel. So, you know, you may just need to change an end point in there or something like that if it is binding, or change the amount that you're putting in. These values that I have given you, they are just for demonstration purposes. So you're just going to have to go ahead and determine how much extra down elevator trim you would like to have available to you just in case. Now the second point, or the second scenario that I talked about, was the amount of down elevator that is deployed when the flap switch is thrown. Most planes, just about all of them quite honestly, will need some kind of compensation from the elevator. Majority of them will need down elevator when you deploy the flaps. It's not always the case. P-51 that I have needs just a little bit of up elevator when I deploy the flaps, but that's unusual. P-47, the T-28, the Corsair, the B-25, every one of them that I have needed the down elevator. It's varying degrees of down elevator. So when you set up your aircraft, basically you're setting it up and you're kind of taking a guess, well, about 12% or something like that, maybe 15% down elevator, only in the full position when I deploy the flaps, when the flaps are in full position. Most of the time you don't need it when they're in the first position or half position. So anyway, it's something to keep in mind. Now I've put in, I think on this particular model about 12%, something like that. And you'll notice when the flap is deployed, I'm going to move this back now to where we've got our servo, down elevator servo, back to the 0 position. When the flap is deployed in the first position, nothing is happening, and then you'll see a slight movement. In most cases, it's only going to take something like 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch, and that will do all you need to keep the nose of that airplane down. But you are guessing for that first flight. So the nice thing is, I've put in like 12% or whatever here. It only gives me somewhere around 5 degrees of deflection. The nice thing about it, and that is a pretty good figure that I've used according to most cases with the warbirds that I have. However, I never know for sure how much down elevator I'm going to need when I deploy those flaps. So if that is not enough, then all I have to do is use that right slider, click it up just a little bit. I've already set my elevator trim now for normal flight in a situation where I'm doing a maiden. I've got my elevator trimmed out for normal flight now, which is what will normally happen unless you have one of these tail heavy situations. But under a normal maiden flight, you trim out your elevator, you trim out your ailerons. Then when you set up for your first approach, you find out whether or not you've got your elevator mix right. I don't want anyone thinking that I'm saying that this programmable mix that I have shown you in this video is the only way of handling this situation for maiden flights. It's not. Futaba has already made a provision, and it's in your linkage menu, to where you can go and you can adjust the amount of trim that is available from your normal trim, from your normal trim switch. So right here I've already gone to the linkage menu. The only thing you have to do is scroll down to the function, hit the return button to select it, then scroll down. We're looking at the elevator right now. Of course, you can do this on any one of your channels. Go over to your trim T2 for elevator, hit the return. Now it takes you here to the screen showing that you're at switch T2, and the normal rate that is here is 30%. Only thing you have to do is scroll over to it, to the rate, select, and you can move it any direction you want to. 30% is what's normal. You can take it on up to 35, 40, whatever amount you think is necessary. And then all you have to do is select it and you've got it. So with that, I'm going to just hit the home exit button, go back to the home screen. All right. That is a very good function, and it will help on some of your simpler models. But I really prefer to use my programmable mix, particularly for scale planes, warbirds, planes that have flaps on them. Very simply because there's certain advantages there. On normal maiden, you go up, you adjust your elevator, you adjust your trim, you get your plane set for normal flight. You're not really even having to go in and make any abnormal trim or anything else, just a little bit to get things leveled out on your plane, get it flying the way that you want it. So once that is done, if you've got a plane that's got the flaps on it, say, then you go ahead after everything's trimmed out and you begin to set up for your approach, check out your flaps, and you find out that you still need more elevator than what you put in there, more down elevator trim. So all you have to do is go over to your right slider switch, dial in just enough more to where it gets you at the right descent rate, holds the nose exactly the angle that you feel like it needs to be for your approach. Then when you get down and you've landed, your trim that is necessary for normal flight has not been changed. Everything that you've done for the flaps is done right there with that right side slider. So the only thing you have to do is find out how much you have changed it with that right side slider. Go back and dial that in on the automatic down elevator that you've set for your to come on with your down flaps. And then when you go back up, your level flight is still exactly the same as it was because you have not had to do anything to change that trim setting. So with that being said, I think it's a very viable way of handling things, and I think it's one of the simplest ways. One other final thing about it is that if you get a hold of a plane that is badly out of control, as far as the pitch is concerned, it's just very overly out of control, and you're just having a real hard time with it. If you've got this right side slider set up for the additional down elevator, then you don't even have to take your hand off of the elevator stick. You can actually keep your fingers right there, be controlling your elevator, and just reach down with your middle finger and adjust that slider. So it will help you get your adjustment a little bit quicker, a little bit easier in a very adverse situation. So with that having been said, just make sure on all your maiden flights you're doing everything you can to make sure that everything is ready for that plane to fly. Check all of your connections, servos, batteries, flying surfaces for movement, security, clevises, everything like that. Dual rates and expo. If you use dual rates, make sure they're set up on the switches that you want them to be on. I have found out with the scale planes, I really don't even have to use the dual rates. I just go ahead and adjust for the recommended high rate settings that comes with the plans on these planes. And then I set up about 30 to 35% or 30 or 35 expo on my elevator, aileron, and rudder. And that normally will take care of anything. It allows me to have the expo when I need it for the less sensitivity near neutral, and yet I have the high rate setting at the end of the stick. So anyway, it's something very useful. I hope you have found this video to be helpful to you. It does illustrate one way in which these programmable mixes can be put to use. So with that having been said, I appreciate you watching the video. I hope you enjoy your flying. Have a good day.